Well, this was the Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak, speaking to the President of Israel earlier today.
First and foremost, I wanted to express my solidarity with you and your country after you have suffered something unspeakable, a barbaric act of terrorism, and to your last point, we should call it what it is. An act of terrorism perpetrated by an evil terrorist organisation, Hamas. That's what I believe, and that's what we will continue to say.
Of terrorism perpetrated by an evil terrorist organisation, Hamas. And this was the leader of the opposition speaking last week on the matter.
Real sense of deep anxiety, obviously in relation to the events in Israel, the appalling, shocking events, cold-blooded murder of men, women and children. And it's terrorism, and Hamas bears the responsibility.
It's terrorism and Hamas bears the responsibility, US President Joe Biden said last week.
The brutality of Hamas, his bloodthirstiness brings to mind the worst rampages of ISIS. This is terrorism. But sadly, for the Jewish people, it's not.
This is terrorism. Even a spokesman for His Majesty the King said His Majesty is appalled by and condemns the barbaric act of terrorism in Israel. Donald Trump, James Cleverly, David Lammy, just about every respectable person or institution seems willing to call this brutal act what it is, terrorism. But the public service broadcaster paid for by you is unwilling to do this. When two people were tragically killed in Brussels this week, the BBC was willing to call it terrorism. And in the past, the BBC has been willing to use the term terror attack too. In 2017, when a terrorist killed civilians on Westminster Bridge and a policeman outside Parliament, the BBC rightly called it a terror attack. In the 2015 Paris Bataclan attack, the BBC called it a terror attack too. So when terrorists attack London, Paris or Brussels, it's terrorism, but when it's Israel, it's not. And I'm afraid this points to something very undesirable at the BBC. During discussion on BBC Arabic last week, this happened.
وينضم إلينا من تل أبيب محمد كعبية.
أولا ردا على من تكلم من قبلي في معكم، حماس ما فعلته هو ما يناقض كل المعايير الإنسانية والشريعة الإسلامية. هم لم يحاربوا جيش الدفاع، هم قتلوا ناس عزل أبرياء في بيوتهم، هم قتلوا أطفال ونساء وقاموا بخطفهم إلى غزة. هذه المشاهد.
ولكن محمد هذا ما فعلته إسرائيل أيضا.
In this clip, the BBC host was trying to defend the massacre of 1,200 people by comparing it to Israel's attempt to defeat terrorists. The public service broadcaster is trying to create an equivalence between a democratic state and terrorism. The BBC has just taken several Middle East journalists off air for alleged social media activity, including liking posts of dead Israeli bodies. Why should anyone remotely sympathetic to Israel in its situation be forced to continue to pay the licence fee when the BBC's Middle East journalists mislead viewers about Israel's actions, when its staff show their true colours on social media, appearing to support or at least sympathise with a terror group, and when it can't tell the truth about Hamas? Of course, I want to hear from you. Let me know your thoughts via mailmog@gbnews.com.